Remember when every pub carried a thick haze of smoke above the bar, and your granddad could instantly judge someone's class by the type of cigarette they smoked? There was once a time in Britain when smoking wasn't just a small habit. It was woven deep into the culture, stitched into everything from wartime rations to bus stop chatter. Today, we're taking a drag from the past as we explore 10 cigarette brands that only true Brits will remember. Whether you once sneaked one behind the shed, pinched a cigarette from your uncle's packet, or just recall the stubborn smell that clung to your coat after a long bus ride, this is a wave of pure nostalgia. So, let's spark up the memories and dive straight in. Player number 6, launched back in 1965, was introduced as an answer to the growing demand for more affordable cigarettes in the UK. It served as a cheaper, filtered alternative to the more premium Player's Navy Cut, and it didn't take long before its popularity exploded, especially among young adults and the working class crowd. The number 6 pack was instantly recognizable, with its distinctive blue and white design. The cigarette itself had a bold, full-bodied flavor. Not smooth exactly, but not harsh enough to scare away new smokers either. It quickly became the go-to choice for the budget-conscious, often seen dangling from the mouths of factory workers, lorry drivers, or teens sneaking their first puff behind the school bike sheds. Price-wise, it was unbeatable. In the early 1970s, a pack of 20 would set you back around 20 to 25 pence, making it accessible to nearly everyone. But in 1978, when the EU harmonized tobacco taxation, cigarettes were taxed by retail price instead of weight. This caused a huge shift. Before, small cigarettes were cheap while larger ones were a luxury. Afterward, the difference between a pack of Player's number 6 and something more upscale like Benson & Hedges Special Filter became almost irrelevant. Overnight, sales plummeted, and by the status-conscious 1980s, number 6 had fallen completely out of fashion, eventually disappearing quietly from the shelves in 1993. Camel cigarettes might be most famously tied to American culture, but they carved out a loyal niche in the UK from the 1960s through the 1980s. They attracted artists, intellectuals, and jazz enthusiasts who longed for something more exotic than the usual British brands. Camel, often unfiltered, came in packs with the iconic desert imagery, pyramids and camels, that lent an air of mystery and rebellion compared to the no-nonsense appeal of Woodbine or number 6. Since they were imported, Camels weren't cheap, and you'd mainly find them in urban hubs like London, Edinburgh, or Brighton. But for those who smoked them, the smoother draw and richer taste felt like something more sophisticated, almost continental. During the 1980s, filtered versions were introduced in an effort to expand their reach in Britain. But they couldn't keep pace with the dominance of more affordable homegrown brands. Today, while Camel is still a global name, it has largely vanished from UK shelves, remembered only by those who smoked them to stand out from the crowd. Capstan Full Strength was unmistakable, a cigarette never intended for the faint-hearted. Strong, unfiltered, and full of flavor, Capstan carried a reputation as solid as a miner's handshake. Originally made by W.D. and H.O. Wills, it had been around since the early 20th century, but its real boom came during and after World War II. These were the cigarettes your grandfather lit on the docks, or that sailors sparked up after returning from long voyages. By the 1950s and 60s, Capstan Full Strength had become a staple in working-class communities, especially in port cities like Liverpool, Glasgow, and Bristol. The cigarettes themselves were short, stubby, and loaded with high tar and nicotine. One drag hit the chest like a hammer. At about 40 pence a pack, they were tough and affordable. But as health warnings grew louder and filtered cigarettes gained popularity in the 1970s, Capstan's reputation as a rough, high-nicotine smoke began to work against it. Its naval-themed design was slowly stripped back, and the brand eventually softened. Still, anyone who smoked Capstan in its golden age will tell you it was the real deal, a cigarette that separated the men from the boys. Embassy, launched in the 1910s by Imperial Tobacco, quickly established itself as one of Britain's most dependable and appealing brands. But it was the 1960s when Embassy truly reigned supreme, holding the title of the UK's best-selling cigarette from 1964 until Players No. 6 stole the crown in 1970. At its peak in 1968, Embassy commanded 24% of the market, with catchy slogans like "Inhale to your heart's content." The packaging had a refined, polished look, while Embassy Gold offered a more premium touch. The smoke itself was medium-bodied, smooth, and not overly harsh, making it a reliable favorite. Embassy poured money into advertising, TV sponsorships, billboards, and a loyalty scheme that allowed smokers to trade coupons for everything from kettles to bicycles. It wasn't just a cigarette, it was marketed as a lifestyle. But by the late 1980s, health concerns and changing tastes sent the brand into decline. Embassy still exists today, though the famous Gold and Envoy versions have largely faded. If you remember trading in those coupons, or spotting the red and gold packs in handbags and coat pockets, you've definitely earned your place in Britain's smoking history. Woodbine wasn't merely a brand, it was a cornerstone of British culture. First launched in 1888 by Wills, Woodbine shot to fame during the World Wars, becoming the unofficial cigarette of the British soldier. Cheap, strong, and ever available, it quickly became synonymous with the working class man and stood as a symbol of resilience. Known as the poor man's cigarette, Woodbine was unfiltered, with a raw, smoky taste that hit hard with nicotine in just a few drags. These were not cigarettes for casual smokers. They were intense, tar-heavy, and unforgettable, often staining fingers and lungs alike. Through the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, Woodbines were everywhere, with a pack of 10 costing less than a shilling. You'd find half-crushed packs tucked into breast pockets, or stubs discarded outside pub doors. Though a filtered version was later introduced, it couldn't save the brand's popularity. By 1988, it was discontinued and the blend itself altered. While Woodbine is still around in name today, old smokers will tell you the taste is nothing like the Woodbine they knew. Consulate stood out in a market dominated by grit and grit. Where others were rough and heavy, Consulate sold itself on style and smoothness. In the 1960s and 70s, it was advertised with the slogan, "Cool as a mountain stream," which fit perfectly with its light menthol taste. The smoothness appealed particularly to women and to newer smokers who found harsher cigarettes like Capstan or Woodbine too overwhelming. Its white and green packaging looked clean, fresh, and modern, an intentional contrast to the earthy industrial branding of rival smokes. At the time, menthol was still a novelty, and Consulate cleverly marketed itself as the healthier option. In terms of price, it sat comfortably in the middle, not as cheap as Players No. 6, but not as expensive as luxury brands like Dunhill. By the late 1980s, however, the menthol fad waned, and in 2020, menthol cigarettes were banned entirely in the UK. For those who remember the crisp, minty drag of a Consulate, it remains a brand tied to a very specific moment in British smoking history. Craven A, launched in 1921 and named after the 3rd Earl of Craven, quickly rose to become one of Britain's most recognisable cigarette brands during the first half of the 20th century. Manufactured by Carreras Limited, its key selling point was smoothness. The filtered version was particularly well loved, offering an alternative to the harsher, unfiltered options dominating the market. Clever marketing built on this idea, promoting Craven A as less irritating to the throat, a claim that feels ironic today, but it worked wonders back then. Its bold red, white, and black packaging stood out as polished and stylish. Especially popular in the south of England, in places like London, Surrey, and Kent, Craven A held a strong foothold until the late 1980s, when it began to fade. The brand was eventually sold and disappeared from most UK shelves. While you may still find it in niche or overseas markets, its British chapter is long closed. Still, for many, the very name sparks memories of a smoother smoke and those unforgettable vintage adverts that promised, "will not affect your throat." Senior Service, with its regal name and distinguished packaging, was seen as a premium choice, particularly during its height from the 1950s through the 70s. Originally launched in 1925 and named after the Royal Navy's nickname, the brand leaned heavily into naval imagery, anchors, flags, and all, evoking pride, masculinity, and tradition. These cigarettes were strong and filterless, delivering a full-bodied punch that satisfied smokers who wanted something heavier. At around 50 pence a pack in the early 70s, they were considered mid to upper range, a choice for those seeking strength with status. Though eventually a filtered version was introduced, the brand remained tied to its old identity. And by the early 2000s, it had been discontinued. For those who smoked them, senior service was remembered as a serious cigarette, one not to be taken lightly. Strand, on the other hand, became infamous not for its success, but for its disastrous marketing. Launched in 1959 by Wills, Strand was intended to be a sophisticated, modern cigarette. The advertising campaign showed a sharply dressed man wandering through deserted London streets under moody jazz, with the tagline, "You're never alone with a Strand." But the public didn't buy it. Instead of seeing it as stylish, people found it depressing. The man looked lonely, not cool. The campaign backfired and sales collapsed. In fact, only a fraction of smokers ever bought a pack. It was a shame, really, because the cigarettes themselves weren't bad at all. Medium strength, leaning smooth, with sleek blue and white packaging. But the stigma of the failed campaign stuck, and within a year or two, Strand disappeared from the market. It has since gone down in history as one of the biggest advertising failures in Britain. Still, if you've ever seen one of those haunting old ads, you'll never forget it. And if you smoked one, you're among the very few who can say they tried Britain's most famously forgotten cigarette. Rothman's King Size was one of those rare brands that managed to balance style with substance. In its heyday, from the 1960s through the 1980s, it was seen as the cigarette of the refined working man. Rothman's had a distinctive blend, slightly sweet with a strong, balanced nicotine hit. The brand was also heavily tied to sports sponsorship, adding an aspirational edge to its image. Its packaging was crisp, blue and white, exuding confidence without being flashy. Rothman's weren't a budget option, with a pack of 20 costing about 40 pence in the late 70s. Similar to Embassy and pricier than Number 6. While Rothman's still exist today under British American Tobacco, the modern cigarettes are a shadow of the old King Size, altered by changes in tobacco content and regulations. Smokers who remember the original often describe it as the perfect blend of taste, strength, and sophistication. And with that, we've reached the end of today's nostalgic journey. If this trip down memory lane brought back the scent of your first puff, or reminded you of a pack long forgotten, give this video a like. And don't forget to subscribe for more blasts from the past. See you in the next one.